Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Tuesday, August the 11th in the Memorial Arena in Victoria, BC. I'd like to start by thanking the volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes the program happen every week. The first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack show, and so we'll start off. I'd just like to say, as this election plays itself out, that to me the real issue is that the country is now run by corporations and it's run for corporate profit. And I think that's an issue that should get some mention in this election, but I don't think it's going to. And just you know, I wrote down a few places where it pops up, and one is housing. Like in a country like Canada, you'd think the housing policy and housing planning was developed for the benefit of the people of Canada. So everybody has good housing at low cost. Now in a democracy, that's what would happen. But what I'm saying is we're a corporate-run nation and we're run for corporate profit. And so look at our housing instead. It costs, you know, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 to buy a condo. They're often, as we've seen, they're often not well made, not built to last. Our neighborhoods are all bisected by streets. They never plan to get people, and especially families, off of busy streets. And it's caused massive debt for a lot of people. So I have a feeling that if we look at housing policy, we'll see that corporate profit, the maximization of corporate profit, is what seems to be happening. And I assume that's what it's all about, because we do live in the second biggest country in the world with only 35 million people. How can land cost more than it costs in probably downtown New York?
Yeah, you know, housing should be a federal issue. You know, one of the problems we saw in Victoria here is we've seen the last few weeks the events of the tent city and all that, looking for places for people to be. You know, as was commented in the papers, that if we made this into a better housing situation in Victoria, homeless people from all across the country would come here. And therefore, and it's a good point, therefore...
But the whole country should have it.
Exactly. We should have, the Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation used to have very good programs for subsidized housing and very, very low interest loans for guaranteed mortgages. There's, you know, it should be a federal issue.
They built a lot of low-cost social
That's right.
housing, and there was enough housing for people. Now, I think they've artificially created a housing shortage.
Yeah.
And one result of that is huge costs for people who can afford to buy houses, and the other result of the shortage is at the bottom, there's nothing. That's how short we are of housing, that a lot of people haven't got any.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are the sort of things that we're dealing with here in Victoria, in a local place. We're trying to solve what really is a federal, national issue for housing. If we had more direction from Ottawa, then we could even launch into local campaigns, knowing that we had support from federal institutions. So that's not happening. The other thing is, I think about, you know, we're always trying to figure things out on the show, and I learn a lot just talking to you. But when we're looking at the issues around the sewage treatment plant, we're trying to figure out what are the best ways to approach this problem, and why are we so stuck in the middle here of trying to decide which way to go. And one of the reasons is because of the meddling by the federal government, in this case, by dangling this funding in front of us and saying, okay, we're going to give you $200 or $300 million if you build this one big sewage treatment plant. And it seems that all the local politicians are terrified not to do it. And again, it's the federal government getting involved in a local issue, and they shouldn't, especially if we cannot come up with a proper design. And these are all issues around democracy, of course, and fair process. But I think what's really important is that we should be getting involved locally, and this is the best chance to get some things straightened out and to get democracy back locally before we can do anything provincially or federally.
Yeah, and it will be interesting to see if on the sewage treatment project, for example, it does end up in the end being at least a democratic process that gives the people of Victoria what we want and what's best for us. I mean, there are obviously powerful forces moving us in other directions, because the initial plan that came out of the CRD staff was to spend $1 billion on a project that did absolutely zero environmental good. So that's what we were going to do, and we escaped that disaster, hopefully, by a whisker. We may not have escaped it yet.
Well, this is my big concern, is that you'd think that once you cut the head off the beast, that it's supposed to die, but not in this case. And I think the tail is flailing around still, Jack. There's a lot of powerful forces that want to have a centralized sort of a treatment plant. There's a lot of good things, a lot of money to be made in that project. But they have not opened this up truly to a really fair process, allowing a lot of people to come in, to make proposals, as you've said before, and for the public to consider all our options. Now, the only way to make it truly democratic would be, number one, as a side issue, but still integral to this, is that the CRD has to be elected. I can't see another way around it. You have the provincial government now looking into this and supposed to be studying this idea of amalgamating these core municipalities of Victoria. Why would you go to the provincial government to ask them that question? Because for sure they're going to gerrymander something to rip away our control. But number two is, on a project of this size for the whole region, the proposals should come in, the best proposals should be presented, and then there should be a plebiscite. We should vote on a project of this size. Why shouldn't we? We're going to be paying taxes on this for 50 years or 100 years.
And that's one way to make sure that at least the politicians can't just jam this down our throat. But Lisa Helps has clearly said that we, meaning they, the CRD, will make the decision. So let's see how. All we can do is watch this as it plays out.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about ISIS. Our puppet Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, today or yesterday made a point that Canadians, if he's re-elected, they're going to make a law saying that Canadians cannot travel to places where terrorist governments are in control or something like that. And, you know, when I heard that, I thought, well, does that mean I can't go down to Seattle to watch the Seahawks play? Because, I mean, a lot of people know, and maybe we're not wrong, or maybe we're not right, but it's certainly what we think, is that if you look at the facts, then the number one terrorist nation of the world for like the last 70 years, ever since the day they dropped the atomic bombs on Japan, has been the United States. And when I say that, I certainly don't mean the people of the United States, but I mean the lunatic fringe fascists who have taken over the United States and are running it today. So, and for Harper to make that statement, and the media just lets it go by without ever looking at the truth. And if you start to look at, and again, maybe I'm wrong, but if you go back to the beginning of this terrorist disaster in the Middle East, it was funded by the United States. They, in order to, what they did was they funded a fundamentalist Muslim army to attack the nation of Afghanistan, which was an ally of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was drawn into the war, but couldn't win it because this Mujahideen army funded by the United States was given the most high-tech weaponry in the world. And the Russians couldn't fly their jets and helicopters in there, right? In the end, you know, Afghanistan collapsed, Russia, the Soviet Union collapsed. Afghanistan was completely destroyed by the fundamentalist armies that the United States had created after the Russians left. They turned on each other and destroyed the nation. And it's gone from there to Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden worked for the CIA, and the destruction of Libya, the destruction of Iraq, now the destruction of Syria. And we keep now, but we're never told this. All we're told is the story that somehow we're being attacked by, and this is the problem with this election. It's like an Alice in Wonderland election. There's just no truth out there from the politicians or the media, and Harper is allowed to make statements like that and get away with it without any questions, no deeper analysis, nothing. And again, maybe I'm completely wrong, but this is what I believe.
Jack, don't be so modest. You're pretty close to the truth. You know, and we brought this up several times, but it does warrant repeating that Harper himself helped bring people into a war zone when he allowed his ambassador in Jordan to funnel children into Syria.
Why don't you just tell that story, because it's worth repeating?
Well, it's how do you tell this story quickly? You know, Stephen Harper had a bodyguard by the name of Bruno Sacamani. He became the ambassador, Canadian ambassador to Jordan. His CSIS agent, that was his bodyguard, is now the guy that's running the ambassador or the
Jordanian embassy.
Jordanian embassy. Now he starts running a agent in Turkey, whose name I can't remember, who was smuggling people from Turkey into Syria. Now, the big story was when these schoolgirls went missing in Britain.
Right, 3 schoolgirls from Britain. I think a lot of people remember that story, right?
You know, this is printed up in The Guardian and the Globe and Mail and the Ottawa Citizen. These are articles that can be checked online. And this guy was running people across the border, and he delivered those 3 schoolgirls into the hands of ISIS in Syria.
And he was working for the Canadian embassy in Jordan,
yeah,
which has a very close link to Stephen Harper. So the Canadian embassy was smuggling people from Turkey into Syria to join ISIS. And somehow this story gets completely covered up. And
you know, Bruno Sacamani, Harper's old buddy, the CSIS agent. Now, I mean, think about it. They put a CSIS agent in and created. Became an ambassador. Oh, by the way, he was in charge of Iraq also. So, I mean, this is a very powerful position. Let's not forget about this. This is the truth, Jack. These are the facts as they stand. I want to be. Somebody has to correct me. I think the facts stand and they're pretty strong. Now, why couldn't you just bring that up in a debate? You know, what would sink his ship worse than that? But apparently, we're all supposed to have amnesia.
That's right. The other parties don't mention this story.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Why not?
You know, it all gets very strange. And as I said, look, this is not to me a real election campaign. It's some kind of a play that they're presenting to the public with a lot of actors, some of whom are acting either knowingly or unknowingly on behalf of other powers. But in the end, this is, to me, a real fake election. As fake as the recent BC election that elected the Liberals, which we know was fraud. They were fraudulently put in power by the NDP. We have the same situation in Ottawa. We have the same power brokers there. They're writing up this little script about this strict 3-way race, and they're trying to ignore the Green Party best they can by not letting Elizabeth May into the real debates.
Yeah.
And so what we're being dealt out here is just a bunch of hooey. It really means nothing.
I got an email, and basically the story in the email was corporate media allows Harper to lie to Canadians during debate. And there were 7 different, let's say, you know, quotation mark, lies he told, or mistruths. But the important point is nobody ever questions him. The media, when the media starts to allow lies to be told and truth has to deal with lies, how can truth possibly win? So here they are, and maybe these are wrong, who knows? But twice during the debate, Harper said Canada has a balanced budget for this year, but the Office of the parliamentary budget officer says Canada will have a $1 billion deficit this year. Right now, maybe it's running in a surplus, but it'll have a $1 billion deficit this year. Harper's 8th deficit in a row, including, I think, I'm not sure about this, but I think including a few years ago, Harper ran the largest deficit in Canadian history. And the national debt is up $150 billion since Harper took over our country. And so he's allowed to make these statements like, Canada has a balanced budget, but we're never given the context, the facts. And people support Harper because of that.
Him on that, and he was slightly challenged, but they never really dug into it.
Another one, Harper, talking about the recession. Harper said, yeah, the energy sector is shrinking, but the rest of the economy is growing. But Stats Canada says the largest contraction in the economy is really in manufacturing, not energy. And I mean, these are important points. To scuff it all off and say, yeah, we're in recession, we're not in recession, the people of Canada should know that our manufacturing sector has been shrinking for a decade, and it's because of the free trade agreements which our governments keep signing. But that isn't an election issue either.
Yeah. Well, the real dichotomies, let's just look at this election. To me, there's the rich and the poor in Canada. That's a dichotomy. That's real. The rich are voting for the Conservatives. The poor are not participating, or sometimes voting for the Greens or for a progressive party. You also have, which is not really recognized well, is the city folk, country folk issue in Canada, where the city folk all tend to have ideas around environmentalism and trying to protect the environment, and the country folk are trying to keep from starving to death. They need jobs. They'll do anything for jobs. So when resource extraction starts to become an industry in the rural part of the country, and that's where it's all at, people are supporting that because they don't have anything else. And so we have the old and the not very bright, as far as I'm concerned, out of it group that are voting Conservative. Then you have the young and the disenfranchised groups that are not participating because they don't see any point in it. 40% of Canadians are not going to the polls. That's not because they're lazy or something. They've been beaten down to the point where they say, why bother? And in the end, there's an analysis right now that shows that Harper's going to win this election.
Very possibly. I think where we are right now, it's clear that from where we are right now, the corporate media can make any of the three major parties win, whoever they want.
Yeah.
And if they find a scandal here or make a story there or a bad picture there, that party will go down enough and somebody else will come up enough. They can do whatever they want, and that's exactly who will win this election, whoever the corporate media and the corporate
Let's not forget, Jack, that the pollsters lied to us in British Columbia. They faked their polls and they lied to us about the results in the previous election with the NDP and the Liberals here. These are the same pollsters that are now in Ottawa. Are we supposed to start trusting the polls? These people are looking after the corporate interests. They know how to tailor questions to be understood one way or the other. And we cannot trust pollsters anymore. That's be ridiculous to trust them.
Yeah, is climate change an issue in this election? I don't know if I've heard it mentioned.
Well, of course, the Green Party's bringing up the best they can.
Yeah. I don't hear much about the Green Party in the media I follow.
No, you don't. I mean, in the debate that
right.
Elizabeth May participated in, it was 1.5 million people watched that debate. Now, in a national debate, if had it been put on by the major networks, you'd get around 10 or 12 million people watching. So you can see where they allow this happen on the side. Elizabeth May shone in the debate. Many people thought that she was head and shoulders above the other people there.
But they won't let her into the other debates?
They won't let her anything else.
Yeah.
So,
what an attack on our democracy.
That's right.
What an attack on our democracy by not only the people running the debates, which I guess are the media, but the politicians themselves. I mean, it's a disgrace.
Why would they participate? You know, if Mulcair had any courage, and Trudeau, I mean, if they really were concerned, they'd say, hey, we're not going to debate until Elizabeth May is there talking. She's got legitimacy in this country and the issues she's talking about. Now, they've been doing a little sucking up to Elizabeth May, and all trying to pretending they're friends with her. And you can see how they want a little bit of that green stuff to rub off on them a little bit. But the bottom line is, if they go into those debates without her, they're snubbing fair process. This is the way it is.
Yeah, so it's a dangerous time for Canada, because these just are very dangerous times. I mean, the environment is a disaster. There's I don't know, it's not a big story, of course, but there's a huge algae bloom off the west coast of North America, running, I think, from the Mexico California border all the way up to Alaska and beyond. It's toxic, it's having immense effects. They've never seen anything like it, and of course we don't even know about it. But that's the environment, the economy. I mean,
yeah.
What can you say?
You know, I
and socially, in social
Yeah.
issues, you know, you sort of feel the edges fraying. You know, things are. It's not.
They get away with so much. You know, I've made a few phone calls this week. One thing I did was just to bring up these issues. I'm always concerned about public relations firms and how they affect democracy in elections. So I phoned up the Liberals, the Conservatives, and the NDP. I did phone the Greens, but I never got through. And I asked them one question. I said, could you tell me the names of the PR firms that you're using for your election campaign? The Conservatives answered that we use no public relations firms whatsoever. The NDP and the Liberals both have yet to answer the question. So they're hesitant to answer that question. To me, that's a huge issue, because we know, especially with the NDP, the guys that stole the election here in British Columbia are moving on to Ottawa. And they're advising the NDP in Ottawa, advising Mulcair. So I don't know what that all means, Jack, but you know, we know that they're meddling in the process, and it's not fair. So I'm going to take it, if they don't answer me, is that they refuse to answer the question.
And we're going to have to leave it there.
There you go.
Thank you, Walter.
Always a pleasure, Jack.
And thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.